But there's also a Q&A box, and if you would put down below, if you could put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, we'll make sure that we get those asked. Kitty Connect of our leadership team is going to be monitoring that box, and she's going to have a Q&A session after Cam has completed his presentation. When
Very,
that's over,
very, just I'll break in just 1 second. If you don't see Q&A at the bottom of your screen, click on the more on 3 dots for more, and you'll
correct.
find Q&A there.
Thanks, Kitty. That's helpful. Yeah. So when that Q&A session is over, I'm going to give you a brief update on Indivisible Evanston and our upcoming activities. So as you heard, we're going to record the meeting and we'll send a link to the recording and the slides to everyone who registered for this meeting. So if you miss something, don't worry about it. You will get a link to the recording. So to get started, I want to introduce you to one of our long-term members, Joan Rothenberg, who she's a Great Lakes advocate and was a board member of the Alliance for the Great Lakes. Joan's going to introduce our speaker, Commissioner Cameron Davis. Take it away, Joan.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. I had a lot of difficulty paring down even to 3 or 4 minutes what I would like to say about Cam, because he's been so instrumental in either creating or moving forward wonderful things that have made our Great Lakes kind of behind the scenes, our water and our Great Lakes, just sum it up that way. Cleaner, better, safer, more accessible. Anyway, and one of the last things he did before becoming a commissioner, which he started, I believe, 8 years ago, maybe a short 2-year term and then a 6-year term. One of the things he did before that was accept an invitation from Barack Obama to be what is simply referred to as the Great Lakes Czar, and in a position to coordinate the various agencies and organizations in the federal government that have Great Lakes related functions. And he'll tell you more about that if he thinks it's relevant at this point, but he, over the years, has become my good friend, partly because he's such a good person, and you'll see, he's done good things because he's got a good heart and a good head. So, all right, Cam, my friend.
Thank you, Joan, my friend. I'm going to have you talk to my wife, Caitlin, more often with introductions like that. And Candace, always good to meet a fellow Davis. Let me start by saying this. I love Indivisible. You remind me of why I got into serving the public's interest in clean water 4 decades ago. You're scrappy, you care, you don't take BS, you keep focused on what's important, not gaming and political games. You keep your eye on the ball, and that's what I love about Indivisible. If tonight you walk away feeling like, whoa, you're right, we need to be doing a whole lot better, then please let your fellow Indivisibles know. I would love to chat with them too. Chicago, southwest part of the county, northwest part of the county, any part of Cook County, I will bend over backwards to always help Indivisible, because you guys are the soul of what should be making our society tick. The other thing that makes society tick is, of course, water, because we all need it to survive and thrive. I grew up just a few blocks away from Lake Michigan, and remember as a kid going to the beach with my mom, dad, brother, and sister. And 2 things. We always had the option to go to the paid part of the beach where you could swim with lifeguards, and you pay, you buy a token and get in, or the unpaid tokenless part of the beach where you weren't allowed to swim. And my mother would always say to us, and she'd wag her finger because she'd get really exercised. She'd wag her finger and say, "This is our lake. Nobody has the right to tell us we can't swim in it." So that's how I became radicalized, I think. And I also remember going for walks with my dad along the same stretch of beach, and he would bend over, stoop over, pick up litter, put it in his pockets, and throw it away, and everybody else would just kind of walk by. So I have some very vivid memories of our beloved Lake Michigan growing up. And I think probably because of that and a whole lot of other reasons, I decided to put myself through law school at night, because I figured the best way to help people was to help protect their water. Doesn't matter what your age, your religion, your gender, your race, doesn't matter. We all need clean water to survive and thrive. That's not just us as humans. It's also the critters that we share the planet with. So if you want to make impact, protecting our planet is the way to go. And that sent me on the trajectory that Joan just mentioned. So here's what I want to do tonight. And it doesn't look like there are a whole lot of us, so we can afford to have a conversation. Is I want to just mention a few things about the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, which I think has the potential to be the premier public health and environmental agency, not just here in Cook County, but I think even in the country, we could lead a whole lot more. Talk a little bit about what it is, and then some of the initiatives and efforts that are going on countywide, statewide, and even here close to home in Evanston. And just so you know right now, I'm going to turn this around. I live in Southeast Evanston. There's our backyard. Lake Michigan is across the street from us. We're in between Michigan Avenue and Sheridan Road, so we are all neighbors here. Okay, I am going to share my screen. Wish me luck, because every platform's a little different. Please let me know when it pops up. I want to make sure that everybody can see it. I'm getting a thumbs up from Joan. That's always a good sign.
You're good.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's do it. Let's talk about how to hug your water. Anybody who thinks you can't hug your water, you're in for a ride tonight, because I'm going to show you how to do it. You might get wet in the process, but you'll also be happier and better for it. I'm going to walk through, as I mentioned, a little bit about the district, because I'm convinced it's probably one of the least known entities in our county. But with that, it also has enormous power to do good if, and this is where I'm headed with this talk tonight, if we can really revolutionize this agency. And I'll get to that throughout the discussion. We at the district, and when I say we, it's all of us, because your property taxes help fund this agency. It's a $1.7 billion per year agency, at least that's our budget this year, 1,700 staff people. So for this agency that few people have ever heard of, it has a lot of resources to do good work. The initial mission of the agency was to protect our drinking water source, Lake Michigan, back in, the late 1800s, early 1900s. And for those of you who don't know, Cook County is the second largest county in the United States by area. It's enormous. It's the size of a small state in the Northeast almost. It's huge. So there's a whole lot to protect. And we have a lot of waterways that run through this county. Here's the map. We all know the Chicago River starting around Navy Pier. Those of us in Evanston know about the North Shore Channel. We used to call it the canal growing up, which always sounded very scary to me. But the North Shore Channel is something that I think we can turn into much more of an amenity than it is now. We treat 1.2 billion gallons of wastewater a day on average. That's not even including when we get big rains or things like that. And we do several things. The two main missions we have are treating wastewater so that it goes back out into the world at least as high quality as we've got it. And we also reduce flooding. That's called stormwater. And as we all know, stormwater, which I'll talk about in more depth later, is an enormous public health and financial health threat to all of us, including our neighbors. We are governed by 9 board of commissioners members. You can see me on a day when I didn't have the chance to shave very well in the upper right, and these are my colleagues here. The board sets policy for this agency. What that means is, in your talking to me, my talking to you, we now have a relationship where you can come to us or me with ideas, and I can try to push them through this agency that has this enormous power to do good for the public. If we can make the agency's board of commissioners one that puts public health first and politics second. Okay, so let's get into the good stuff here. These are the things that I get really excited about. How can we do all this great work that I'm talking about? Let's start with climate. The district uses a lot of electricity. And as we all know, electricity, depending on how it's generated, can have a big impact on our climate. Our portfolio is largely comprised of coal burning and nuclear. That's important because coal burning, of course, sends greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and nuclear has nuclear waste related issues that have to be dealt with. So one of the things that we've done is we've established a climate action plan, and our goal under this plan is to be what's called carbon neutral. That is, we're not sending greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere, or if we are, we're at least offsetting those emissions with the use of clean energy 100% by the year 2050. And that may sound like a long time, but I promise you 25 years from now, we'll be here sooner than we can all imagine. One of the things that I did 2 years ago was wrote and introduced had colleagues in the state legislature introduce HB 2219. And what that did was it opened up the district's property for solar and wind energy generation. In other words, renewables. At the agency, we can't do anything without the permission of the state legislature. So for us to go beyond our traditional mission, as you remember, wastewater, stormwater, for us to go beyond that and open up our property for these kind of secondary purposes, I don't think they're secondary, but not mentioned in our statute that founded us, we had to go back to the state legislature in Springfield to get that permission. That's what we did. Governor Pritzker signed the bill into law last year. We now have the ability to lease your property for wind and solar. That's a huge victory, and it's a great step in the march towards getting to carbon neutral. I mentioned stormwater before. And what we do is we try to protect Cook County against flooding. And let's just back up for a second. I want to go back to the screen here, and I would like to see who among you, raise your hand virtually or literally, has ever had basement flooding or known a family member or a friend who has had their basements flood, no matter where they are. Okay, Kathy, I see you. Great. Kitty, I see you.
You know what, Cam, you can only see the panelist at this point because we're in webinar mode. So I think
Okay.
people can put it in the chat. And I will tell you that the night I moved into Evanston, my basement flooded completely.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That does not sound like a good move. Well, I remember my basement flooding too. When I was growing up, I remember my dad saying, come down to the basement. You're going to help me get rid of these smelly rugs and throw a bunch of stuff out. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old or so on. And it really left an impression with me. And it also gives me a whole lot of empathy for the people who still have their basements flooding today. But that's what MWRD does. It manages stormwater to keep reducing people's basements from flooding and over time, streets from flooding and so on. How do we do that? It sounds like it's a really Herculean effort. Well, it is. But we do that through a variety of ways. We do that through primarily engineering projects, and you can see some pictures here. But let me go into just a little bit more detail. One of the things that we do is we have a program called Space to Grow, where I'm going to go to this slide, where we help cost share for schoolyards to build green infrastructure. In other words, we redo playgrounds so that water naturally filters back down into the earth rather than sloughing off into a gutter where it goes into our systems and it becomes very expensive to treat. Now, the problem is, and it's not really a problem, but it's a half a solution. We only cost share right now in the city of Chicago. Where do we all live? We live in Evanston. Evanston's not in the city of Chicago, it's a suburb. And I see my friend George Nassas on as well tonight. And I think, George, you're in Glenview. So the suburbs haven't gotten the benefit of this program. About 4 years ago, I introduced a measure to expand this amazing program, which just has universal support, from the cities and extend it into the suburbs, where the district essentially pays 100% for the design of the green infrastructure project. So that was a win. Over time, all of these projects will help reduce flooding. They'll help reduce, the other benefit is they'll help reduce flood water that essentially goes into the system and creates what are called combined sewer overflows. You can tell by just the name, sewer overflow, we don't want those. So that's another effort that helps with stormwater. Another is deep tunnel. I get a lot of questions about this. That's the massive labyrinth of underground tunnels and reservoirs that we have. If you ever drive, through the southwest suburbs, you can see old quarries there that are used to store stormwater until we get bright sunny days and we can catch up with treating that water through one of our 7 water reclamation plants. This is also really important for protecting water quality around the region. Okay, that's a little bit about stormwater. Let's also talk now about PFAS. I'm looking at my PowerPoint. I can't necessarily see responses that come in, but I want to assume that most of you have heard what PFAS is. Polyfluoroalkyl substances is the long name. We just refer to this family of chemicals as PFAS. They are also known as forever chemicals because they simply just do not break down readily in the environment. What does that mean? That means that these chemicals can build up in our bodies and in the environment without really going away. They started to become manufactured in the 1930s and 1940s. They are used widely among all of us in our homes. So for example, PFAS are used in cosmetics. They can be used in dental floss, in food packaging, in water-resistant clothing, in furniture, because they have these incredible properties that we've come to rely on. They're very temperature stable, so they don't catch on fire easily. They don't freeze easily. They are mostly impermeable, which is why they're used in water-resistant clothing like jackets and shoes. And they are very slippery. So that's why they've been used in nonstick cookware. So Teflon, for example, in our Teflon coated cookware. So we use these substances all around our homes and in our daily lives. Whenever we do the laundry, whenever we put cookware in the dishwasher, just a tiny bit of these things run off. They go into the MWRD sewer system, where essentially they create even bigger problems. So one of the things that I think we have to do over time is we have to reduce our reliance on these kinds of chemicals in and around our homes. One of the things that I'm really proud of is we just about 6 months ago got a fact sheet posted on the MWRD website that essentially helps identify for you what PFAS, where PFAS is used in our household products. Because when we think of pollution, we often think of what? We think of a discharge pipe with really gross, slimy stuff coming out of it and being discharged into a waterway. In this case, the real culprit, or at least one of the top culprits, believe it or not, is us, because of our unwitting use of this family of chemicals. So go to mwrd.org, just grab something to write with, mwrd.org, and in the search bar, just put in household PFAS, and you will find that fact sheet. At the time that we were in my office working to get this posted, there was only one other public utility that we could find that was helping to educate people about their own use of PFAS. We couldn't find anybody else, any other utility anywhere around the country that was doing it. So I think you can be really proud that MWRD is on the cutting edge of helping to educate all of us about how we can be the solution, all of us, not the problem. Okay, let's go to polluter pays, because this is really critical, and this is something that I have just thrown myself into. I think we can all agree that we all feel a lot of pressure when it comes to our taxes in Cook County, and that life is getting more expensive. One way in which I'm trying to reduce our tax burden and our cost burden, because remember, we all own MWRD. We all pay for MWRD through our property taxes. One way in which I'm trying to reduce our tax burden is by shifting more of the onus and the cost for dealing with pollutants back to the manufacturers. And in this case, none of us on this webinar created PFAS, at least that I can imagine. But we've all had to pay for the after effects of PFAS. So how do we shift the burden back to manufacturers so that we as taxpayers aren't footing the bill, or at least as much of the bill, to pay for monitoring, to pay for remediation, to pay for the staff time that's involved with understanding the damage that PFAS causes? We wrote and we introduced HB 2954. This is the second big bullet here, HB 2954, that would essentially establish a trust fund. And that's why you get the alliteration here, the double entendre, a trust fund paid for by manufacturers to offset the costs to you, to me, to the district, through the district, for all the work that has to be done to deal with this problem that none of us created. Now, HB 2954 did not really get off the ground in this year's part of the legislative session, but we're revising it, we're updating it, and we're going to push again. And I can promise you this, I am going to turn back to Indivisible throughout the county come the next part of the legislative session and ask you to push for the next iteration of this bill. It is not fair. It's not fair that we should have to pay for this problem that we didn't create. Another example of polluter pays is the Illinois Drug Take Back Act that was just passed a couple of years ago. And essentially that creates a system whereby pharmaceutical manufacturers, kind of like PFAS manufacturers, but drug manufacturers have to pay for unused pharmaceuticals to be taken back and either destroyed or recycled. We know now that we're not supposed to flush them. We should not be throwing expired or unused pharmaceuticals. We shouldn't be throwing them away. They should be going back to the manufacturers where they can be reconstituted or otherwise responsibly addressed. We have the ability, because of the state law, for pharmaceutical companies to pay for drug take-back programs. However, we at the district, meaning us, still pay for drug take-back receptacles. Again, I don't like this. I think it's unfair. I think we should be shifting the onus for expenses back to the manufacturers here. There were only 2 of us on the board who voted to take advantage of this program this year. I'm not giving up. I want to see us take advantage of this program. It's not going to save us a whole bunch of money, but it is a great example of how we can keep shifting the burden of costs back to the manufacturer. Okay, I mentioned 2954. That's a work in progress, but we did have a victory with HB 2516. That was led by the Illinois Environmental Council, or IEC, and it effectively banned or phased out PFAS in cookware, cosmetics, and many of the other products that I mentioned before. And I'm not even covering a fraction of the list. Camping gear, for example, is another one that's on the list. So that one did pass. That is going into effect in less than a year, and I'm really excited about that. I think we should all thank IEC in our own way for spending years to get this bill passed. But those are the kinds of things that are incredibly important for us to keep not only protecting public health, but protect fiscal health, because the two are very much related. Okay, something that I know is on a lot of people's minds. It's on my mind, especially given what Joan said, that my work with the federal government, and I used to get my paycheck and work for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It's been heart-wrenching to see friends and colleagues, EPA and the other agencies, get laid off, put on administrative leave, and otherwise be subject to the reduction in force that we all know. One of the things that I'm really concerned about is the elimination of the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC program. It's a program that MWRD has taken advantage of. The old model under the Federal Emergency Management Agency, has been a disaster happens, FEMA swoops in and tries to undo the damage. Many of us over the past several decades have said, good, but let's also try to prevent the damage from happening in the first place. Why? Because it's a whole lot cheaper to deal with damage before it happens. But also, secondly, because by the time damage does happen, there are a whole variety of secondary and tertiary negative impacts that happen, including disruption to people's lives as their homes are destroyed from flooding or what have you. So one of the things that we are working on is how we make the district more resilient in the face of these kinds of budget cuts. EO 14154 also really essentially puts fossil fuels back at an advantage. But I mentioned before some of the things that we're trying to do to encourage and incentivize renewable energy on district property. Okay, let's see what's next here. Going back to the screen. This is my final slide. This is probably the most important slide of all, because this is how you can get in touch with me. Why do you want to get in touch? Why do you want to track what's going on? There are a bunch of reasons. One is because I think there's some fun things we can do for you. Many of you are part of groups, whether it's a religious organization or a civic organization like Indivisible. Meaning my staff and I, can help you with tours of some of our water reclamation plants. We can also keep you informed of virtual tours, which in a lot of ways are even better than the real life tour. And also, as importantly, by staying informed, you can also understand why I am working so hard to make MWRD the force for your health and your family's health, and me and my family's health, and our collective community's health that we all really deserve. It's an agency that has really been subject to a lot of political push and pull over the decades. And I'm convinced more than I ever have been that having dedicated commissioners who are going to put public health first is now more important than ever, especially given what we see going on at the federal level. I am a big fan of Mark Twain's, and he once said, no person has ever been converted by more than 20 minutes of sermon. So I'm going to stop with the sermon there, and I would love to have a dialogue with all of you.
Okay. Hi, Cam. Because this is set up as a webinar, I'll be feeding the questions to you. But we'll make it as informal and as conversational as we possibly can. I had got some questions in ahead of time, but there is one very specific one in the Q&A that I thought I would just ask first, and that is, do nuclear plants, which you said generate a lot of our electricity, do they use a lot of water, and is that an issue?
Good question. Yes, they do use a lot of water for cooling. And they're not big polluters, I would say, when it comes to chemical pollution. But think about it this way, there's a reason why you see so many nuclear power plants located around water bodies, around the Great Lakes, the Illinois River, the Ohio River, and so on and so forth. It's because they draw that water in, they use it to cool their processes, and then that water goes back out into the world warmer or hotter than it was coming in. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but what happens is fish are attracted to that warmer water. So sometimes those fish can be impacted, and fish populations can be impacted as well. So there are aquatic life impacts to that, what we call thermal pollution.
Thermal pollution.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. Yeah. Another one that's in the Q&A is Chicago on track with the climate action plan to become carbon neutral, or is that not even too late?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to respond about Chicago's climate action plan, but what I can say about the district's climate action plan is that I think it's going to be very close as to whether we can be completely carbon neutral by 2050. Why do I say that? I say that for a variety of reasons, but let me just give you one example. A few years ago, I pressed really hard for the district to have a policy that we wanted to have our fleet be 100% comprised of electric vehicles, EVs, by, I believe it was 10 years from that time. Well, the pandemic kicked in, supply chains started to crumble, things like that. I don't think we're going to meet that goal. And everything like that happens, whether it's a supply chain issue or whether it's an increase in labor costs or material costs or what have you, every time that happens, that's pushing against our ability to meet that goal. That said, I'm looking for ways to make sure that we don't lose ground. For example, with the bill that I mentioned before, that gives us the authority to lease district property for solar and wind. To date, we have not had any, say, community solar developers take advantage of that. There's some nuts and bolts problems we got to work through, but we're working on it. We're trying to clear a path for us to still be able to meet those goals.
How much property does the district have? I guess I had not thought about it being a big area.
Yeah. That's the cool thing, is the district is the second largest public property owner, second to, and now it's trivia time. What's the biggest public property owner in Cook County? Anybody?
You want to guess in the chat?
I'm a former law professor, so I love the Q&A part when I get to ask the questions.
Is it Park District?
Very close. Very, very close. You want to keep going? You're almost there. You're very warm. Yes. Donna.
Forest Preserve.
Nailed it. Forest Preserve District of Cook County is the largest public property owner in Cook County. MWRD is second. So for us here in Evanston, I think many of you know the golf course and the property that lines the North Shore Channel. That's all MWRD property. And not that the district has that kind of continuous unfragmented holding on all of our waterways, but it gives you a little bit of a feel for how it's not just about the waterway, but it's about the land that is adjacent to those waterways that is so important.
Got it.
Donna, you win $1 million from Invisible.
Yeah, you win, Donna.
Not from me.
Okay. The next question is kind of, I don't know, big picture, long term about climate change, and it's similar to one of the questions I got ahead of time. Kent asks, with climate change, many areas around the world will experience decreasing access to water. How well do you think the Great Lakes will fare over the next 80 years as climate change happens?
Yeah. I love that question because it kind of forces us to think decades ahead instead of just a day or two in advance. I think, well, there are a lot of ways to answer that. From a policy perspective, I think we're in pretty good shape. 15 or so years ago, us drafted something called the Great Lakes Compact, which means that if you're going to take a gallon of water out of the Great Lakes, you have to return it to the Great Lakes. It's virtually impossible to, that's called consumptive use, if you want to geek out on water terminology. The almost the opposite of consumptive use is a diversion, and that's where a gallon of water goes out of the Great Lakes drainage basin and it doesn't return, maybe indirectly by evaporating and then falling with rain falling back into the Great Lakes. But a good example, the best example of a diversion out of the Great Lakes is, do we want to do another trivia question, Kitty?
Okay, sure.
All right. Can anybody give us an example of a water diversion out of the Great Lakes system? I know you guys can do this. Yes, Kent, you nailed it.
Rivers.
Jerry, you nailed it. Tanya, you
Right.
nailed it. Donna, again, it's the Chicago River. About 100 plus years ago, century and a quarter, our region reversed the Chicago River system so that instead of flowing into Lake Michigan, which it usually did, now it flows the opposite direction to the Illinois River and onto the Mississippi, then down to the Gulf of Mexico. And that was done to keep pollution from heading out into our drinking water supply, and instead to go downstream to Peoria and St. Louis and a bunch of other cities that were not happy with us at the time. That is an example of a diversion out of the Great Lakes. It is virtually impossible under the Great Lakes Compact for diversions to take place. The other reason I say that I think from a policy perspective, we're in pretty decent shape is if you've ever carried a gallon of water or milk, let's say, almost the same thing, it weighs 8 pounds. Try moving millions of gallons of water across 1,000 miles, sometimes uphill, downhill, then uphill again. The amount of energy it takes to pump and move that water is just enormous and expensive. I don't think the economics are there for, let's say, the Southwest or the West to try a water grab of the Great Lakes. What we've been saying for well over a decade is, if you want water, come to the Great Lakes region. We're Midwesterners, we're friendly, we're neighborly, we welcome you. So come here. Instead of moving the water somewhere else, you guys come to the water. So I think we're in good shape from a policy perspective.
Okay, so if more people are going to move this over this long term that we're thinking about now, what should we be doing to prepare? Do you think the policies are in place that we need, or do we need to do different things?
That is a phenomenal question. Not just a great question, but phenomenal. And I think there are a whole bunch of answers. We are already hearing about and seeing climate migration happening when it comes to farming. As water becomes more scarce in the plains states because they pump the Oglala aquifer underneath the ground, many are moving closer and closer to the Great Lakes where water is much more accessible. So I think one way in which we need to be prepared is for more farming to take place in our region, which I think is a good thing, but it also comes with a suite of potential negative effects that we have to be mindful of and to be prepared for, like fertilizer runoff, and, pesticide use, more row cropping, which reduces biodiversity so that monarch populations are suppressed. So as always, there are pros, there are cons, and it's our job to make sure that the pros out tilt the cons. I think it's also happening with people as well. I know because I've seen it in my own family on my wife's side, with people moving from the South because they're tired of the heat in the South. I've heard of people moving from the West because they're tired of the wildfires in the West. So being prepared means also revitalizing some of our communities that have, say, been underinvested in over the years.
Wow, great points. You have been thinking about this, I can tell.
Thank you for giving me credit where I probably don't deserve it.
No, that's great. Let's see, I'll go back to the Q&A now. Barbara asked what virtual tours of MWRD facilities are available.
Yes. I love that question. And as we speak, I'm going to just go online and I'm going to see if I can find a link to be able to share with you in the chat.
Okay. She specifically asked about Stickney and Lockport.
Sure. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, you can go online and you can find just about any of that. Let's come back to the chat and
Okay.
there you go. Just go to mwrd.org and go to the search bar and do virtual tour, and you should be able to get a sense of what's coming up. We at the district typically offer a handful every quarter, so it's not about once a month. So it's not difficult to find them.
Great. That's great. George asked, with fresh water being so valuable, should people stop drinking bottled water? I think you mentioned George.
Thank you, George. I love that's great. That means you just gave me an opening to tell a story. So this was maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago or so. I was out walking the dog. I didn't own a pet, but my wife made it really clear when we got married that part of the deal was if I was going to marry her, I had to also adopt the dog. So while she was working, I was taking the dog out for a walk, and I saw driving through our neighborhood down Michigan Avenue, a bottled water truck. And I happen to know that this bottled water company and where it got its water from. It got its water from an aquifer on the other side of Lake Michigan in Mecosta County, which is up by Manistee, for those of you who are familiar with the other side of the lake. And it occurred to me that here we are, in Evanston on Lake Michigan, and people here in Evanston are buying bottled water that is pumped from the Lake Michigan basin on the other side of Lake Michigan. We use petrochemicals to create plastic bottles. We expend a lot of energy to pump, treat, clean that water, put it into bottles. We then use a lot of energy to drive trucks full of those bottled that water around the bottom of Lake Michigan and back up into the Chicago area, all when we could just turn on the tap and get basically the same water right here. And it really came home to me while I was walking the dog that night, the absurdity of bottled water. So that said, I'm a government official. I don't tell people what to do in their private lives, but I can say what I do in my life, and that is I do not drink bottled water. I will fill up a reusable container. I will drink it out of the tap. If you're nervous, get a filter. All of those are great. We are lucky to have one of the best drinking water sources anywhere in the world. And one of the best ways to support it is to drink from your native water supply. George, thank you. I owe you for the question.
Actually, okay. Let's see. Joan asked, please say more about what you'd like to do in the near future as one commissioner among 9 of this longstanding government entity, MWRD. What are the challenges and how can people help?
Yeah, thank you, Joan. I think one of the things that's really important is that we talk to our neighbors and our friends, and I know Indivisible it makes its mark doing exactly this, about how MWRD can no longer be an afterthought. I remember my boss, Obama, once doing an interview on NPR where he said, we're all enamored with the international politics and the federal politics. We're not always so good at what's going on at the state and municipal level. And MWRD kind of gets sucked into the jet wash of that thought, in that we don't really think about these municipal agencies and how important they are. So my one assignment to you guys tonight is do your research, because every 2 years there's an election, and next year there will be an election. I'll be on the ballot, and others will be as well. But do your research about these commissioners and ask yourself, are the people running here, are they qualified? Do they have a track record of public service and really having the courage it takes to put public health above politics? I think that's the number one most important thing people can do on the topic we're talking about tonight. Thank you, Joan.
Ken is asking more about PFAS. He says, I believe MWRD has recently begun investing in research for understanding PFAS in our waterways. Can you give us an update on some of the research, any preliminary findings, and what MWRD is doing to address concerns about microplastics?
Sure. Starting with PFAS. Actually, let's start with plastics first. Utilities really don't have the ability to treat and filter out plastics. So just like PFAS, where a lot depends on us, if we unwittingly use products that have PFAS in it, it has a chain reaction that impacts MWRD, that impacts our aquatic environment, that impacts our community health. Plastics the same way. And here we are in Plastics-Free July, where many of us have made a commitment to not use plastic during this month. Moving on to PFAS. I think the thing we need to be doing here, twofold. It's a complex problem, which is why I'm kind of stumbling a little bit. But as I think about this, there are 2 things that I think virtually everybody agrees on. One is we need to shift the cost burden back to the manufacturers. And the second is we need to prevent PFAS from being used, because once it's used, it's really hard to put that genie back in the bottle. The technology is not necessarily there to be able to take PFAS out of water. And if we do, then we have other problems we have to deal with. It's not there to take PFAS out of biosolids, for example. If PFAS is discharged and it settles down into the sediment of a waterway, we don't really have the ability to pull that out and treat it. That said, to answer your question, there are efforts that are going on right now. For example, we have a partnership with Argonne National Labs. Some of you are familiar with that, part of the U.S. Department of Energy here in Cook County, where they've been experimenting with heat and electricity to break the bonds that essentially create PFAS and make it so strong and give it the characteristics of a forever chemical. Northwestern University is doing groundbreaking work on the treatment of PFAS in wastewater and finding that surprisingly simple solutions are sometimes the best. Soap and water, things like that. I'm not going to give their trade secrets away, but I do know from chatting with some of the experts at Northwestern University that there are some very promising technologies that are on the horizon.
Well, that's good news. Excellent. Soap and water, huh? Okay. Let's see. Seisha would like your thoughts on something she has heard. A person who researches the history of the Des Plaines River claimed that nearly all the water in the river was from waste treatment plants. She's skeptical and would think that at least at high water levels, much must be rain runoff. What do you think?
Yeah. I always, when I don't know something, I always say I don't know, and I don't know the answer to that question. But when the Des Plaines floods, it is usually because of big storms that we have. The other dynamic that's interesting, Kitty, and we haven't really seen this too much until recently, is, and I have to invent a name for this, is when we've had really cold weather here in our winter, such that our ground is frozen and we have snow on the ground, and then all of a sudden we get this snap thaw and it rains. What happens then? The rain hits the ground. It has nowhere to go because the ground is still frozen, hasn't had a chance to warm up. All that rain moves down into the MWRD system where it can cause those combined sewer overflows that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And that's a pretty new dynamic that's just started to happen in the past 10 years here. It was very unusual to see that. But that's the kind of thing that can really create flood conditions in the Des Plaines and other waterways around the region.
Okay. Let's see. Jeffrey's asking, are you lobbying for your government? I guess he means the state government, to petition the EPA to monitor microplastics, especially in the Great Lakes, so we can explore how to treat and clean the water someday. Here in Michigan, I guess he's in Michigan, we're actively trying to get Governor Whitaker to do the same. We need 7 governors under this and the Clean Water Act can then be used for enforcement.
I would love to hear more about that. This is the first time anybody has brought this up with me. What I can say, Jeffrey, is that when I was CEO of the Alliance for the Great Lakes, which Joan was a board member of, we started the Adopt a Beach program with volunteers going out, not just cleaning up beaches, but tracking what they found. And the reason for that is because we can solve problems when we track them. And one of the things that we found, and the Alliance continues to find, is that plastic is overwhelmingly the number one thing that people are finding on their beaches. So one thing, I wish I could answer your question better. I'm feeling a little embarrassed that I can't give you more, but the Alliance has data that can help us identify exactly what kinds of plastics are the biggest culprits. And the advantage to that is it helps us prioritize which kinds of problems we address first. I know it's a partial answer, but it's kind of the best I got right now.
Okay, we understand. One of the questions I got ahead of time was, what do you recommend reading or watching to get more information on this topic?
Love it. Well, 2 answers to that. One of them is Dan Egan's book called The Death and Life of the Great Lakes.
Death and Life of the
Highly
Great Lakes.
recommend it. And one of these days, the second recommendation is a book that I haven't written yet, but I have in mind a parody about wastewater utilities. But you'll have to stay tuned for that one because I haven't written it yet.
Okay. Any like periodicals or good ways to keep apprised of what's changing?
There is so much out there. It's almost impossible to just
I
provide
see.
one recommendation.
Yeah.
But start with that book that I mentioned, The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. It's a great read. Egan was he's a former journalist at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, so he knows how to write, knows how to tell a story, and it's a really good survey, excuse me, of the different issues facing our waterways, particularly around this region. If you're interested in diversions and consumptive use, then the book I would recommend is called The Great Lakes Water Wars by Peter Annin, Annin. If you're interested in becoming futuristic, and that is starting to understand an issue that's coming down the pike, but it hasn't really hit us at full gale force, same author, Peter Annin, wrote a book called Purified, and it is about how recycling water is the way of the future. And that is something I'm working on right now, but maybe that's a discussion for an Indivisible chat in the future.
Okay. Kathy asked, what's the status of our agreements with Canada on managing the Great Lakes?
Yes. Thank you, Kathy. So I mentioned the Great Lakes Compact before, which is a contract among the 8 Great Lakes states on water use. There is a mirror agreement with the Canadian provinces that achieves the same thing. So essentially the answer I gave about with respect to the compact before, same goes for Canada because of this companion agreement that our states have with the 2 Canadian provinces.
So there are agreements between
There are
Illinois,
agreements
for example,
between the
and Canada.
Yes, so there is an agreement among the 8 Great Lakes states, Illinois, Indiana, I could go through the list. And then there is a companion agreement among those states and the 2 Canadian provinces. So it's a little bit like belt and suspenders.
Okay, I see.
And even better, belt, suspenders, and I don't know what else you use to keep your pants up, but the federal government has blessed this system too. So there's even a third safety net.
Thanks. Okay. What are your thoughts on what Illinois can do? What can we take? What actions can we take at the state level while the federal government is going to be consistently refusing to protect our water?
One thing is getting ready to support HB 2954 or whatever the new number is going to be with respect to creating a trust fund for PFAS, dealing with PFAS.
Okay.
I'm presuming that most of the folks on our webinar tonight are from Evanston, so that will mean reaching out to one of my heroes, Robin Gable, our House Majority Leader and our state representative, and another one of my good friends, Laura Fine, our state senator, to get them on board and then to ask them to get their colleagues on board for those things. But stay tuned on that. So that's one thing that comes to mind that I think is really, really pressing. Another thing is a 4-letter word: vote. Do your research and vote. We cannot have good policies without good policymakers. And a lot of times folks think that we as elected officials can work miracles and somehow magically bring everybody on board if we just have a great idea and it's the right thing to do. A lot of times public sentiment really drives whether or not good policies get through. So do your research and vote would be the other thing.
Okay. And the PFAS bill was one you mentioned, the same one you mentioned earlier in your presentation. You
That's
promised
correct.
to let us know when it's time to write to our our state senators and reps.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly we'll certainly welcome that when the time comes. And I think you've already answered our last question, which is what's the most effective thing we should do if you have to pick one? And I take it would be vote.
See,
Okay.
you should be giving this talk, Kitty. You got it.
No, no,
I
no.
did see something also, a couple more come in, and I don't want to give them short shrift.
Okay.
Tap water is not the same, tastes bad. But I go to the store and get
Yeah.
filtered water in my glass bottles. You know, I have noticed this time of year, the summertime, sometimes water does taste different from the tap. I know we here at home have a filter in our water dispenser that's built into the fridge. You can also get water filters that you can use that will eliminate that taste. Usually that taste is due to algae out in the lake. As
Yeah.
much as we treat it, there can still be residual. It's not harmful. It just has that after effect.
Yeah, I haven't experienced that in a while.
Yep.
But I
It is-
remember some summers the water tasted a little bit off, but I
Yep.
mostly drink filtered anyway.
Yep.
All right. Well, Cam, I think it's about time to let you go. Thanks so much for answering all these questions. And I think that Candace has some announcements to
Thank
close
you.
out
And
our meeting.
I will just say, I thank you. And I just love you guys at Indivisible. Thank you for being
Thank
such
you so much.
patriots and warriors. I'm going to go. Take care. Thank you for the invitation, Joan.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Take care. Thanks so much.
All right. Are we back to me? Let me do some screen sharing.
There we go.
That was, hold on. I have to move this over so I can see how to share my screen. I apologize. Just a second. I have to get back to it. And I shrunk it. There we go. Okay, can you see that now? Can you see my screen?
Now. Yeah.
Great. Sorry
Looks
about that.
good now. Yeah.
I just wanted to cover a couple things with you all. First of all, Cam gave us his slides and had some of this information on it, but I wanted to share it again, and we'll share these slides, and if Cam's willing to part with his slides, we'll send those out as well. He's got that website, mrd.org, with all sorts of information on it. And here's the information he shared about his chief of staff and who to contact there. So that's great information to have, and we should keep them in mind and pay more attention to the next election, clearly. And then I just wanted to cover a little bit about Indivisible Evanston. If any of you are not familiar with this, which I hope by now most of you are, but we are, our main goal is to resist the GOP's extremist agenda, elect Democrats or progressives, and fight for progressive policies and voting rights. So if you are not signed up for our newsletter, there's a link here, or you can go to indivisibleevanston.com, and there's a link to newsletter sign up there, because we put a newsletter out every week, and that has a link to all of the most current actions which you're going to want to keep up with. We also have a Facebook group and a Facebook page. We're on Blue Sky, we're on Instagram. And if you want to volunteer, there's a link in this slide to the volunteer sign up form, which we'll send out. And just to go over a few upcoming events, on this Thursday, July 24th at 2:00 in the afternoon, there's going to be a discussion of what's the plan, which is a virtual discussion with the co-founders of Indivisible, Ezra Levin and Leah Greenberg. They do this weekly, but this week they're going to have Erica Chenoweth, who has become quite famous as the 3.5% lady. She's done research that says that if 3.5% of the population gets up and shows up, we can resist a bad administration. So she's going to talk with them about the new 1 Million Rising campaign. 1 Million Rising is sort of what comes after the No Kings event. 1 Million Rising is the next set of actions that we all need to take. She's going to talk a little bit about how that works and what's going on there, but there is 1 Million Rising training. The second session of that training will be on, oh shoot, let me click on this link. I didn't put the date on there.
It's on the 30th.
The 30th of July. Yeah. And I would encourage everyone to sign up for that. And the first session is actually recorded if you missed that and want to watch that. But the second session is coming up. Let me see if I can make that bigger. Second session is coming up and will be important. And we will probably be covering that in our September meeting. You know, it's all about what the next actions are, what we can do locally, how that all works. And so it will be part of what we do going forward. We just want to learn more about that. Also, just this weekend, the Evanston Pride Community Picnic is this Saturday from 11 to 3 at Ridgeville Park. And we're gonna, oh, I see, there's the July 30th. It just needed to get moved. So that's just this Saturday, July 26th, 11 to 3, and Jackie and I will be there with some information and buttons and hopefully some snacks. So if you get a chance to come to the Pride Community Picnic, please join us there. And we have our Pro-Democracy Book Club meeting on Wednesday, August 20th at the Skokie Public Library, and we're discussing how to stand up to a dictator. So that should be interesting too. And the best way to keep up with us is to get the newsletter, because we try to keep current with everything that's going on. And as we said before, let me stop sharing. Okay. We said before, we'll send out a link to the recording. We'll send out those slides and the slides from Cam. So thank you all very much for coming. If anybody has any, let me just check the chat. I think that was a really interesting discussion. And maybe we better hold on to our property, because if everybody's going to be moving here, it's got to be good for us, right? But thank you all for coming. We hope to see you soon. Thanks.